Hello, I'm Esther Gitu-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Israeli forces battled Hamas militants amid building rubble in Gaza's north Thursday as they inch their way closer to two big hospitals. Candidates spar in the third Republican presidential debate held without former President Donald Trump, who still holds a commanding lead in the polls. And Kenya's social media for audiences turn to what is known as solutions journalism to offer audiences a more in-depth and proactive approach to issues such as climate change. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. French President Emmanuel Macron is appealing to Israel to protect Palestinian civilians during its war with Hamas. Macron said, quote, "All lives have equal worth and that fighting terrorism can never be carried out without rules." Macron made the comment at a Gaza aid conference in Paris Thursday, where he also reiterated that protecting civilians is non-negotiable. In a late-breaking development just into VOA, according to media outlets, the White House says Israel has just agreed to 4-hour daily humanitarian pauses in its assault on Hamas in northern Gaza starting on Thursday. Heavy shelling and columns of smoke could be seen rising over Gaza City Thursday as Israeli forces battled Hamas militants in the north of the war-torn Palestinian territory. Residents in Gaza City, a Hamas stronghold, say Israeli tanks were stationed around the city. Both sides reported inflicting heavy casualties on one another in intense street battles. As a humanitarian crisis grips Gaza, the West Bank town of Hawara, surrounded by Jewish settlements, is being shut down by Israeli forces, not allowing Palestinians to work, drive or walk on its main street. Correspondent Jan Bochert has that story.
For those just driving by, Hawara seems like a ghost town. On its main street, there are no people. All shops are closed. Garbage piles up. Only Israeli soldiers walk around. Since the beginning of the war, Palestinians have been forbidden to work, walk, or drive on the main street of this Arab town in the West Bank.
We cannot even reach a medical center. We cannot have access to any shops. We cannot have access to hospitals. We cannot have access to ambulances. We are shut completely down of any livelihood in this road.
Hawara has been a focus of violence in the West Bank. The town is cut off by the main road that crosses the West Bank from north to south, linking important cities like Ramallah and Nablus. It is also surrounded by many Jewish settlements. Before the war between Israel and Hamas broke out, confrontations between settlers and Palestinians were common here, with deaths on both sides.
The soldiers and the settlers, they come to the street in Hawara and start throwing rock, start throwing bombs to us, and they make us close. We cannot open, we cannot have our business, we cannot open it.
With the escalation of violence, Israeli forces now are preventing Palestinians from crossing from one side of Hawara to the other by car. Almost all the streets that link to the inner parts of town have been blocked off. There is only one point in the central part of the town where residents can cross on foot.
Hawara is now divided into sections. The upper part has some capabilities, has some supermarkets. The municipality is on that side, so people can survive. Our side is really suffering. We don't have shops, clinics.
The Israeli government built a new road to bypass the main street of Hawara, but so far the Israeli cars keep flowing through the middle of the town.
For more on the Israel-Hamas war, correspondent Jan Bochert is standing by live in East Jerusalem. Jan, bring us up to speed on Thursday's activities, which included more heavy shelling in Gaza.
Good night, Star. Good evening. Situation in Gaza, it's really bad, as we all know. The situation keeps being very difficult for the population there. The Israeli forces are getting into the Gaza city center now. The battles are very, very aggressive. So far, 40 soldiers from the Israeli forces were killed since the ground invasion started.
You know, you talk about the bombing going on in Gaza. What's being done, Jan, to protect Israeli hostages still held by Hamas, including civilians from Palestine itself?
That's a question no one has an answer so far. Hamas said at least 60 people, 60 hostages were killed during the bombardments in Gaza, especially in northern Gaza. But we don't have a secure information about the situation of those hostages. 239 people are still on Hamas' hands, but nobody knows how many of them are still alive.
So what are we looking at as this bombardment continues? And of course, we've just had the breaking news that Israel will have some pauses to allow, some humanitarian aid and civilians, kind of take care of that. What are we looking at moving forward?
Well, the Rafah border was open again after several days closed. But UN says there are no enough water, no enough medicine, not enough fuel to help the people who are injured there. And we're talking about thousands of people injured there. UN also says that the situation it's getting worse with diseases that are spreading there now, especially diarrhea. Only in this last month, they registered 33,000 cases of diarrhea, most of them in children under 5 years old.
Well, Jan, many thanks for your reporting. Jan Bochat reporting live for us from East Jerusalem. South Africa's foreign minister says the country is recalling its diplomats from Israel to assess its relationship with the country amid a rise in civilian casualties from its war with Hamas. For more on this move, I spoke to Michael Walsh, a senior fellow in the Africa program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute.
I would start off by saying it's not really that big of a surprise. I think most of us have been waiting for that to happen and expecting that to happen as the siege of Gaza and then the military incursion into Gaza proceeded. The move to recall all diplomats for consultation back in South Africa may be the prequel to something bigger. I think the remarks that were made in the aftermath of that decision were that they need to determine whether or not they can sustain this relationship. And so that could lead to a complete breakdown in relations between South Africa and Israel. And I think it's important from a contextual point of view to point out that South Africa is not the only country that's done this.
But it's one thing to recall the diplomats, but also another one in terms of, how do you explain why is it that South Africa does not have an ambassador in Israel?
Yeah, so this goes back historically to the calls that South Africa has made and the ANC party has made over a long period of time, referring to Israel's occupation of the West Bank and its treatment of Gaza as apartheid. It's referred publicly to what's happening right now with the military incursion into Gaza as being potentially a genocide. They refer to it as collective punishment. These are all international humanitarian law terms that are being thrown around to frame what's happening that Israel is doing in light of crimes against humanity, or at least crimes against international law. And so South Africa made the decision a couple of years ago to downgrade its diplomatic relations with Israel. I think it's important to point out that Israel still has an ambassador in South Africa, though. What happened with Hamas to what's happening on the ground right now in Gaza, what the Israelis are trying to do is to get everybody to go back to the beginning and try to paint this as, what we need to be focused on is that Hamas committed a terrorist attack. And that's what they're trying to do with that statement. And there's a lot of concern about how South Africa responded in the first 48 hours and thereafter to that attack and didn't really focus on what happened. And if you go back to the struggles in South Africa, one of the things that I think is really important to point out, and a lot of people back in South Africa have pointed out, is that the ANC was committed to an armed struggle in accordance with international humanitarian law. And that is an important historical precedent.
That was Michael Walsh, a senior fellow in the Africa program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Right here in the United States, at the third Republican presidential debate, the candidates tried to set themselves apart from each other and from frontrunner Donald Trump. VOA senior Washington correspondent Carolyn Presutti has the details.
The third Republican presidential debate, broadcast on NBC, was dominated by foreign policy. Asked about the Israel-Hamas conflict, here's what they would say to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Finish the job once and for all with these butchers, Hamas. They're terrorists. They're massacring innocent people. They would wipe every Jew off the globe if they could.
You cannot negotiate with evil. You have to destroy it.
There would be no Hamas without Iran. There would be no Hezbollah without Iran. There would not be the Houthis without Iran. And who is funding Iran right now? China is buying oil from Iran. Russia is getting drones and missiles from Iran. And there is an unholy alliance.
With only 5 candidates qualifying for the debate, each had double the amount of time to speak than in past debates. On more money for Ukraine, some division here.
This is not a choice. This is the price we pay for being the leaders of the free world.
Ukraine is not a paragon of democracy. This is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties. It has consolidated all media into one state TV media arm. That's not democratic.
To that, former UN Ambassador Haley replied,
We all remember what that thug did when he invaded Ukraine. We all know that 500,000 people have died because of Putin. And here is a freedom-loving, pro-American country that is fighting for its survival and its democracy.
With fentanyl arriving through the southern border, DeSantis said he would go further than what Donald Trump did during his presidency.
I'm even going to build the border wall and have Mexico pay for it like Donald Trump promised. How are you going to do it? Yeah, Mexico's not going to fork over money. We're going to impose fees on the remittances that foreign workers send to foreign countries. We'll raise billions of dollars. I'll build the wall.
Missing from the stage, as he has been for all the debates, was the Republican frontrunner,
Donald J. Trump.
Former President Donald Trump held his own rally about 16 kilometers away in Hialeah, Florida, with its large Hispanic population. Jennifer Lawless, chair of the Department of Politics at the University of Virginia, says these candidates won't ever best Trump in the polls.
With Donald Trump garnering well over 50% in many of the polls and upwards of 40% in most of the others, no candidate is even in a close second. But if something should happen and Donald Trump is either in prison or unable to run or is forced to drop out of the race for a variety of legal reasons, whoever is second place has the upper hand.
The time to do that is narrowing. Voters will elect a new president in just under a year, and the first state caucus is 2 months away. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News.
Now, for more on the Republican debate, I'm joined live from Washington by VOA's White House correspondent, Anita Powell. Anita, what stood out in the debate last night and why?
Well, what stood out, I thought, was Vivek Ramaswamy's differing with the pack on Ukraine policy, saying that he questions both the Ukrainian president, appearing to call him a Nazi, in fact, though his campaign later walked that back. But otherwise, these candidates showed a very firm line in keeping with the Republican line on Israel, on Iran, on China. It was interesting that Nikki Haley said that her plan was to cut off all trade with China until the fentanyl crisis was addressed. I don't know how feasible that is. And this is where I think, you know, it just needs to be said. These are 5 candidates. None of them have ever served in the Oval Office. None of them have ever, you know, been in the position where they've had to talk to a foreign head of state about all of the considerations on the table and make compromises, which, you know, they criticize the White House for doing. But I think that's the reality of foreign affairs, foreign relations, and politics. So there was a lot of ideology on stage last night, a lot of tough talk on China, on Iran, on Venezuela. But it this is just talk until one of them is standing there taking the oath. And as Carolyn said in her package, Trump is leading. He has a 61% lead against the others. DeSantis is in second place with a paltry 18%. So this has been a very interesting debate. This is 2 hours of America's life we will never get back. But, are these candidates going to make it to the finish line? The numbers don't appear to indicate that they will.
Well, the numbers don't say anything yet as of now, but like you said, former President Trump's absence was, of course, felt. He appears to be the front runner among the Republican candidates. But who stood out here in terms of probably taking on Trump within the Republican Party as the real candidate for the upcoming elections?
Well, this was pitted as a matchup between the two serious candidates being DeSantis and Haley. And I think in this regard, Haley, is the former UN ambassador under Trump, really kind of flexed her foreign policy chops and basically said, I've dealt with these guys. I've done this before. This is the reality. So I think in that respect, maybe she stood out above the others just because she has significant foreign policy expertise in the halls of diplomacy and in one of the most challenging halls of diplomacy in the world, that being the United Nations. So I would say she stood out. But for another reason, Vivek Ramaswamy, who I think we could call a naif, a newcomer to politics, also stood out for his bold pronouncements that not grounded in his experience. He's a biotech entrepreneur. And as Haley memorably said to him, both Putin and she are salivating at the thought of somebody like you becoming president because of his lack of foreign policy experience. So for very different reasons, those two stood out to me.
Well, Anita, thank you very much for your excellent reporting. Anita Powell, our White House correspondent, live for us from the White House. Democrats and abortion rights advocates notched a string of electoral victories this week in an early signal that reproductive rights remain a potent issue for Democrats ahead of the 2024 presidential race. Meanwhile, a Somali woman also made history Tuesday by becoming the first Muslim and Somali mayor in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Nadia Mohammed was elected to the city council in 2019.
This means the world to me. This means that we get the representation that we so deserve. It feels amazing to be the mayor of a city in which I immigrated to 18 years ago, and to be the first Black mayor, to be the first Somali mayor, to be the first Somali mayor, and the youngest mayor. I think it was everybody. I think it was the help and support of everybody. I definitely know it was with the help and support of everybody who encouraged me to run, who kept calling me and saying, you got it, you got it, you got it. Everybody who went door knocking, everybody who told somebody about it. So this is all of our win. I think it means that we can do anything. We're coming to a chapter of America where we make the impossible happen, where we get representations everywhere, whether we are Somalis, Black Americans, African Americans, Latinx, whatever it may be.
That was Nadia Mohammed, mayor-elect of St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Now, women are playing an increasingly high-profile role in bringing peace and security to Somalia, according to a United Nations-supported conference held in Somalia. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, adopted in 2000, calls for annual global open days to acknowledge the importance of women's role in prevention and conflict resolution, peace negotiations, peace building, humanitarian response, and post-conflict reconstruction. Catriona Leong, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Somalia, applauded the federal government of Somalia for adopting a national action plan, which is essential in addressing hurdles to women's participation in politics.
There was sadly a slight decline in the number of women parliamentarians from 24% we achieved in 2016 to 21%. But on the good news side, for the first time in history, we have the first Deputy Speaker of the House of the People is a woman, Ms. Sadia Yazin Haji Samata. And furthermore, women members of the 11th Federal Parliament did secure leadership positions as chairs, deputy chairs, members of committees and whips. So definitely some progress.
Women are more than half of Somalia's population, They are equally competent as men. They are educated with vast experiences contributing to the state of building efforts, according to Saleh Ahmed Jama, Somalia's deputy prime minister, a top government official also praising women. These gatherings are an opportunity for women to engage with political leaders, policymakers, international partners, and activists to advocate for the implementation of the resolution. In Somalia, women play a critical role in bringing peace and security.
Women are the route to solving these conflicts. So we need you at the grassroots and at all the levels up, acting as peacemakers. So let's also remember to try and hear the voice of women.
Catriona Liang, the UN top official in Somalia, confirms the United Nations is working with the Office of the Prime Minister and the Federal Ministry of Women and Human Rights Development to ensure women's voices are heard. Paul Liho, VOA News, Washington.
We would like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, how media outlets are taking a new, innovative and proactive approach to deal with issues such as climate change. Stay with us.
The misuse of social media can lead to the spread of falsehood that endangers lives and property. Nigerian authorities are seeking to pass a law that would give the government power to regulate digital platforms across the country. However, opponents say it's an attempt to control free speech and dissenting opinions. This week on Our Voices, we discuss government bans and internet blackouts said to preserve social order that have created challenges for those who use social media. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain, and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
In other news, eyewitnesses in Sudan say police on Wednesday forcibly evicted hundreds of civilians sheltering at a school in the eastern state of Gaza. One male resident said, quote, "We don't understand why we were driven out." Gaza currently hosts 273,000 people uprooted in the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Mali's army said Wednesday that it had fired on 2 armored vehicles left by the UN peacekeeping mission as it withdrew, which had been taken over by what it says are terrorists in the strategic northern town of Kidal. The army has been carrying out airstrikes in Kidal since the end of last week, following MINUSMA's withdrawal from Kigali. And Nigerian citizens are heavily criticizing the new $2.8 billion supplementary budget signed into law by President Bola Tinubu that includes funding for new bulletproof cars for himself and his wife and a yacht. Opponents of the budget say the spending is insensitive to the plight of ordinary Nigerians who are struggling amid rising inflation and economic hardship. Media outlets worldwide are competing with social media for audiences. Some media outlets are turning to what is known as solutions journalism to offer audiences a more in-depth and proactive approach to such issues as climate change. Victoria Munga reports from Nairobi.
For years, local radio journalist Henix Obuchunju reported on issues important to his community, such as gender-based violence or GBV. But the Nairobi, Kenya-based journalist says the reports weren't having the effect he had hoped for.
So most of these stories were about, GBV, where I come from or where I serve as a journalist. But at the end of the day, you get frustrated because you've not helped this listener to move a step ahead.
So Obuchunju switched his approach and trained in solutions journalism, a style of reporting that focuses on responses to social problems along with problems themselves. Two of his reports that adopted this style of media won recognition in Kenya.
And I'm already mentoring other young journalists who want to pursue that particular route. I mean, yes, not all of us would do politics, not all of us would do other stories. But in any story that we do, what is this new thing in terms of a solution?
The trend toward solutions journalism comes as media compete with social media for audiences' attention. With studies showing younger people using social media sites like TikTok more often for their information and a growing number of news avoiders, people disengaged from news entirely, media are looking for ways to reconnect with audiences. As solutions journalism gathers momentum, media trainers like Kiundu Waweru are helping. He has trained over 100 reporters so far on covering topics including health, technology, and climate change.
No longer, not many people wait for 9 o'clock news or for tomorrow's newspaper that has yesterday's news. Yeah, so what can a journalist do different from the people that are online? I think these new ways of telling stories, investigative, solutions-based stories, to engage the audiences more.
More solutions-based journalism reports are coming into newsrooms, says Mary Mwendwa, an editor at the news website Talk Africa. Mwendwa told VOA that the approach helps keep the mainstream media relevant.
We come in as a mainstream media because, you see, for you to address a problem and bring in a solution, you take the reader through a trailer. You start stating there is climate change, somebody is having an innovation around this subject, these are the challenges they are facing. So you take the reader through a certain trail, which social media will not do, because social media, it's about clicks.
Television and radio remain a dominant news platform in Kenya, so media trainers hope that reaching the next generation of journalists will ensure they can still have an impact on the community they cover. Victoria Amunga, VOA News, Nairobi.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.